Well, good morning. Okay, so we ended yesterday, chapter 12. Key factors. They talked about going to the vernal conclave and how Rowan and Citra were studying because they're going to be tested there, and they're not exactly sure what that test is going to be, and Scythe will not tell them either. Today, chapter 13, is the vernal concave. Remember, tomorrow will be a 5-question quiz over the chapters from this week. So if you want to re-listen to my beautiful voice reading them to you, please feel free to. Or just make sure that you listen to all of them so that you can get the best score possible. Here we go. Falcom City was the post-mortem metropolis toward the very center of mid-America. There, by the river, set low between the sky-soaring spires of graceful city living, was a vulnerable structure of stone, impressive if not in height, but in solidity. Marble columns and arches supported a great copper dome. It was an unyielding homage to ancient Rome and imperial Greece, the birthing grounds of civilization. It was called the Capitol Building, for it was once a state capital, back when there was still states, in those days before government became obsolete. Now it had the honor of holding the administration offices of the Mid-America Scythe Dome, as well as hosting its conclave 3 times a year. It was pouring rain the day of the vernal conclave. Citra rarely minded the rain, but a day of gloom coupled with a day of pure tension did not sit well with her. But then a bright sunny day would feel mocking. Citra realized there was no good to be presented to an intimidating elegy of Scythe. Fulcrum City was only an hour away by hypertrain, but of course Scythe saw hypertrains as an unnecessary extravagance. Besides, I want scenery rather than the windowless subterranean tunnel. I'm a human being, not a mole, he would say. A standard train took 6 hours, and Citra did enjoy the scenery along the way, although she spent most of the trip studying. Fulcrum City was on the Mississippi River. She recalled that there was a great silver arch on the riverbank, but it was gone now. Oh, that's the St. Louis Arch, right? Making reference to that. Destroyed back in the age of mortality by something called terrorism. Ooh, 9/11 terrorism. She'd have learned more about the city if she weren't so focused on the poisons and weapons that she needed to know. They had arrived the evening before a conclave and stayed in a downtown hotel. Morning came much too quickly. As Citra, Rowan, and Scythe walked from their hotel at the awful hour of 6:30 a.m., people in the streets ran to them and handed them umbrellas, choosing to get wet rather than see a Scythe and his apprentice go without one. Do they know they've taken 2 apprentices instead of just one? Citra asked. Of course they know, said Rowan. Why wouldn't they? Besides, Faraday's silence on the matter was a clear red flag to Citra. Did you clear it with the high blade? Didn't you? Scythe Faraday. I have found that with the Scythedome, it is better to ask forgiveness than get permission, he told them. Citra gave Rowan a I told you so look, and he cocked his umbrella slightly so they didn't have to see it. It will be no problem, Faraday said, but he didn't sound very convincing. Citra looked at Rowan again, who was no longer eclipsed by his umbrella. Am I the only one who's worried about this? Rowan shrugged. We have immunity until winter conclave, and it can't be revoked. Everyone knows that. What's the worst that could happen? Some Scythes arrived at the Capitol building on foot, as they had, others in public cars, some in private cars, and several in limousines. There were ropes to hold back spectators on either side of the wide marble staircase leading up to the building, as well as peace officers and members of the Blade Guard, the Scythedome's elite security force. The arriving Scythes were protected from their adoring public, even if the public was not protected from them. I despise running the gauntlet, Scythe Faraday said, referring to climbing the steps to conclave. It's even worse when it's not raining. The crowd on either side is a dozen people deep. Now it was only half that. It never occurred to Citra that people would come out to see Scythes arriving for conclave, but then all celebrity events drew onlookers, so why not a gathering of Scythes? Some of the arriving Scythes gave obligatory waves. Others played to the crowd, kissing babies and randomly granting immunity. Citra and Rowan followed Faraday's lead, which was to ignore the crowd completely. There were dozens of other Scythes in the entry vestibule. They removed their raincoats to reveal robes of all colors, all textures. It was a rainbow that summoned forth anything but thoughts of death. This, Citra realized, was intentional. Scythes wished to be seen as the many facets of light, not of darkness. Through a grand arch lay a grander chamber beneath the central dome, a rotunda where hundreds of Scythes gathered, greeting one another, engaging in casual conversation around an elaborate breakfast spread in the center. Our high school, that middle area when you walk in, is called a rotunda. Made me think of that. Citra wondered what it was that Scythes talked about. The tools of gleaning, the weather, the chafing of their robes. It was intimidating enough to be in the presence of a single Scythe. To be surrounded by hundreds was enough to make one crumble. Scythe Faraday leaned over and spoke to them in a very hushed voice. "See there," he said, and he pointed to a bald, heavily bearded man. "Scythe Archimedes, one of the world's oldest living Scythes. He'll tell you he was there in the year of the Condor, when the Scythedome was first formed, but it's a lie. He's not that old. And over there," and he pointed to a woman with long silver hair in a pale lavender robe, "that's Scythe Curry." "Oh, that's the one that we're reading in the journal, Scythe Curry." Sister Grass, "The Grand Dame of Death?" "So they say." "Is it true she gleaned the last president before the Thunderhead was even given control?" Citra asked. "And his cabinet, yes." He looked at her, perhaps a bit wistfully. Citra thought, her actions were quite controversial back in the day. The woman caught them glancing her way and turned to them. Citra chilled when her piercing gray eyes zoomed in on her. Then the woman smiled at the three of them, nodded, and returned to her conversation. There was a group of 4 or 5 Scythes closer to the assembly chamber entrance, the doors of which were still closed. They wore bright robes studded in gems. The center of their attention was a Scythe of royal blue whose robes contained what appeared to be a diamond. He said something and the others laughed a little too heartily for it to be anything but pleasing him. "Who's that?" Citra asked. Scythe Faraday's expression took a turn towards the sour. "That," he said, not even trying to hide his distaste, "is Scythe Goddard, and his company is best avoided. "Goddard? Isn't he the master of mass gleanings?" Rowan asked. Faraday looked at him a bit concerned. "Where did you hear that?" Rowan shrugged. "I have a friend who's obsessed with this kind of stuff, and he hears things." Citra gasped, realizing she had heard of Goddard not by name but by deed, and more accurately, rumor, because there was never any official report. But like Rowan said, you hear things. Is he the one who gleaned the entire airplane? "Why?" asked Faraday, giving her a cold, accusing eye. "Does that impress you?" Citra shook her head. No, the opposite, but she couldn't help but a bit be dazzled by the way the man's robe caught the light. Everyone was, which must have been his intent. And yet his was not the most observant robe on display. Moving through the crowd was a Scythe in a lavish, gilded robe. The man was so large his robes seemed to be like a golden tent. "Who's the fat guy?" Citra asked. "He looks important," said Rowan. "Indeed," said Scythe Faraday. "The fat guy, as you call him, is the High Blade, the most powerful man in Mid-America Scythedome. He presides over the conclave." The High Blade worked the crowd like a great gaseous planet, bending space around it. He could have tweaked his nanites to eliminate at least some of his girth, but clearly he had chosen not to. The choice was a bold statement, and his size made him an imposing figure. When he saw Faraday, he excused himself from his current conversation and made his way toward them. "Honorable Scythe Faraday, always a pleasure to see you." He used both his hands to grip Faraday's in what was meant to be a heartfelt greeting, but felt forced and artificial. "Citra, Rowan, I'd like you to meet High Blade Excrenates," Faraday said, and then he turned back to the large man. "These are my new apprentices." He took a moment to appraise them. "A double apprenticeship," he said jovially. "I believe that's a first. Most Scythes have trouble with just one. The better of the two shall receive my blessing of the ring." "And the other," said the High Blade, "will be sorely disappointed, I'm sure." And then he moved on to greet other Scythes that were just now coming in from the rain. "See," said Rowan, and you were worried. But to Citra, nothing about the man seemed sincere. Rowan was nervous. He just didn't want to admit it. He knew admitting it would make Citra more worried, which would make him even more worried. So he bit back his fears and misgivings, and he kept his eyes and ears open, taking in everything that happened around him. There were other apprentices there. He overheard two talking about how this was their big day. The boy and the girl, both older than him, maybe 18 or 19, would be getting their rings today and becoming junior Scythes. The girl lamented about how, for the first 4 years, they would have to get approval for the selection committee of their gleanings. Every single one, she complained, like we're babies. At least the present apprenticeship isn't 4 years long, Rowan then interjected, as well as a way to get into the conversation. The two looked at him with mild disgust. I mean, it takes 4 years to get a college degree, right? Rowan knew he was just digging himself deeper, but he had already committed to it. At least it doesn't take that long to get a license to glean. Who the hell are you? The girl asked. Ignore him. He's just a spat. A what? Rowan was just called something, but never that before. They both smirked at him. Don't you know anything? Said the girl. Spat, as in spatula? It's what they call new apprentices because you're not good at anything but flipping your sliced burgers. Rowan laughed at that, which just irritated them. Then Citra came up next to them. So, if we're spatulas, what does that make you? Safety scissors? Or are you just a couple of tools? The boy looked at her like he might slug Citra. Who's your mentor, Scythe? He asked. What? He should be told of your disrespect. I am, said Faraday, putting his hand on Citra's shoulder. And you don't warrant anyone's respect until you receive your ring. The boy seemed to shrink by about 3 inches. Honorable Scythe Faraday, I am so sorry, I didn't know. The girl took a step away as if to distance herself from him. Best of luck today, he told them with a gesture that they did not deserve. Thank you, the girl said. But if I may say, luck plays no part. We've both trained long and have been taught well by our scythes. Very true, Faraday then said. They nodded respectively goodbyes that bordered on bows and then left. After they were gone, Faraday turned to Rowan and Citra. The girl will get the ring today. The boy will be denied. How do you know? I have friends on the bejeweling committee. The boy is smart but too quick to anger. It's a fatal flaw that cannot be tolerated. As annoying as Rowan found the kid, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity for him. What happens to the apprentices that get denied? They return to their families to take up life where they have left off. But life can never be the same after a year of training with a scythe, Rowan then pointed out. True, said Faraday, but only true. Only good can come from a keen understanding of what it takes to be a scythe. Rowan nodded but thought, for a man of such wisdom, he seemed very naive. Scythe's training was a scarring endeavor, purposefully so, but it was scarring nonetheless. The rotunda became increasingly crowded with scythes, and the marble, wall, floor, and dome made voices echo into the top. Rowan tried to hear more individual conversations, but they were lost in the din. Fairway had told them that the gray bronze doors to the assembly room would open promptly at 7 a.m., and the scythes would dismiss all at the stroke of 7 p.m. 12 hours to accomplish any and all business. Anything left undone would have to wait 4 months until the next conclave. In the early days, Scythe Faraday told them as the doors opened to admit the throng, a conclave would last for 3 days, but they discovered that after the first day it became little more than arguments and posturing. There's still plenty of that, but it's curtailed. It behooves us all to move through the agenda quickly. The chamber was a large, huge semicircle with a large wooden rostrum at the front where the grand blades sat, and slightly lower seat on either side for the conclave clerk, who kept records, and the parliamentarian, who interpreted rules and procedures if any question arose. Scythe Faraday had told them enough about the power structure of the Scythedome for Rowan to know that much. The first order of business, once everyone was settled, was the tolling of the names. One by one, in no particular order, the scythes came to the front to recite various names of people they had gleaned over the past 4 months. We can't recite them all, Scythe Faraday told them. With over 300 scythes, it would be more than 2,600,000 names. We are to choose 10, the ones we most remember, the ones who died most valiantly, the ones whose lives were most notable. After each name spoken, an iron bell was rung, solemn and resonant. Rowan was pleased to hear Scythe Faraday reciting Cole Whitlick's name as one of the chosen 10. I'm going to stop there because it is a quite bit longer. I figured it would be, considering it's about the conclave. We'll stop right in the middle of chapter 13, and we'll hear the rest of it tomorrow. Thanks for listening.